Well, today we are launching into the final week of our Gospel Mindset series. So the past 4 weeks, or 3 plus this week, we have been in this series where the goal was to look at different topics. We've looked at our past, things that have happened to us, our time, our marriages last week, and then today, our money. And we're looking at this idea of what does the world say about this topic? So when we talk about marriage, what does the world say is prevailing wisdom for marriage? And then what does the scriptures say is prevailing wisdom for marriage? And what I think you found is as we've gone through these topics, our past, our time, our marriage, and then today our money, is that oftentimes the world's advice and the gospel's advice are very different pieces of advice. That the world says, look at your past this way, and then the gospel says, look at your past this way. That the world says, look at your time this way. And the scriptures and Jesus said, hey, make sure you look at your time this way. We've had one kind of series verse this entire time. It comes from Romans 12:2, and it says this: do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So the idea was this: Paul, when he wrote to the Romans, he was scared that the Christians would be transformed by the patterns of this world, the routines of this world, the wisdom of this world, that they would live in such a way that they wouldn't reflect the gospel in their thinking, but they would live in such a way that they would reflect their culture. And I think that most of us, if we're honest, that should be a fear we have, that we're maybe more American or Americanized or Mercer Countyized, however you want to say it, that we reflect those values rather than pure gospel values. And sometimes they overlap, but there are times that they don't. And when they don't, as Christians, we need to not conform to our culture, but we need to be transformed by the Holy Spirit to look more like Jesus, to sound more like Jesus, to think more like Jesus. That is the whole point of this. The idea is that our thinking leads to our action. That's why on our series, it's a big picture of a brain and a gospel mindset. Because when we think properly, we at least have the opportunity to then act out what we know to be true. If we think how the world tells us to think, we might actually act how the world tells us to act and think it's good wisdom. I saved the topic of money for this last week because it's perhaps the area, and I think I've said this every week, that the world teaches something so foreign, but it's the one where I think maybe most Christians have believed the world's advice on money the most. Now, money and churches have a really weird relationship. In fact, it's the most common knock on churches and pastors in general. You're only after people's money, which is funny because this shirt is from Kohl's. I think these are from Walmart. The shoes are definitely from Walmart. And I drive a 2013 SUV. But people have said that. They're like, oh, you're just after people to scam people's money. It's like, then I'm really bad at that. At Salina First, we don't even pass a plate for the offering, so we're really bad at scamming people's money. We literally have boxes in the back of the church that people who want to give to the mission here can. That's how we do it. So if that's your concern, we're terrible at it, at the least. I would argue that we don't exist to scam people's money. But then there can also be this fear of like, and this can be real because you grew up in church like this, of like, oh man, pastor's talking about money, we're not making budget. Here comes the ask, he's gonna by God's grace, our budget needs are met. So you might say, well, why are we talking about money? Because the world talks about money constantly, and it's not good wisdom. Beyond that, the scriptures talk about money constantly, and they give us a gospel mindset to think through. So when the church doesn't talk about money, when we just seed the ground because we're scared that people are going to think we're talking about money, they think we're going to ask about it, these kinds of things, then we sacrifice a huge area of the scriptures that Jesus gave us wisdom on. In addition, we allow the world to set the stage for how we should think about our money and how we should use what God has given us in terms of wealth, and that's a real problem, as you're going to see today. So today we're going to do something where we've done the past 4 weeks, but if you haven't been with us, we're going to talk about a worldly mindset that the world tries to say, this is the way you should think about this thing. And then by God's grace, if we do our job well, we're going to show you how the scriptures say you should actually think in a different way. and how if you've built a house on the stand of like the kind of the worldly mindset, how you'll see how that's going to lead you into a really bad place. But if you trust God's wisdom, that there's going to be blessing and grace there. So the first foundational lie this morning that I want to look at that the world will try and convince you about money is this. Money will make you happy. Money will make you happy. Now, the problem with this is it's actually a pretty decent lie because it's kind of true. I don't know if you guys have noticed anything. I forgot my wallet. Alex, do you have cash on you? I forgot my wallet. Here, give me some cash real quick. Give me cash. Come on, dude. Hurry up. I forgot my wallet. You got like a 20? You got something. You got some ones, bro. You need to listen to this. Here. Thank you, Carl. Okay. See, this 20. I forgot my wallet in the office here. Thanks, Carl. You see this? Because of this, you can buy like 1 dozen eggs or like 1 cheeseburger at McDonald's. But you can go get something from this. So when I take Carl's 20 and I put it in my pocket, I'm way happier now. I've got money from Carl, and I'm happier now. That's the whole example. I took Carl's money, I'm happier. Because I didn't have $20, now I do. And in the same way, Carl's probably sadder. Because he thought he was just part of an example, but he's now $20 less. And see, that's how this worldly mindset works, is it kind of lies to you. Because if you have some of these things, you are actually happier, which may lead you to believe, so what's wrong with this lie that the world gives you? Because many of us have had lean times with finances. Many of us have had fatty times with finances. But if we're honest, most of us can say that if we have a little cash in our back pocket and the bills are paid, we are a little happier. And I suppose, like I said, it's more of a half-truth than a lie. Money can make you happiness. It can bring you some happiness, but it is fleeting. Happiness is always fleeting. It is like chasing the wind. Listen to me when I say this, that if you chase happiness, you will shipwreck your life because you will never fully achieve it. There are many things that can make us happy, but the second they're gone, they are not happy. I'm very happy right now, but because stealing is wrong, I'm going to give this back to Carl. I'll give it to Sarah, actually. That's what we'll do. And so now I'm actually sad, but Sarah is actually happy right now. And so that was, for 5 seconds, I was so happy. I had a crisp 20 in my back pocket. I had some walking around money. And now that it's gone, I'm back to square one. I'm sad about that. I've used this kind of example before, but it's true. Some of you will go to Seatown after service, and when they bring the wings in front of you, you are going to feel a deep sense of happiness, or you should. That is a blessing from the Lord. But when there's like 3 left, you'll start to feel like, oh no. And this feeling will start to diminish, and then when they're all gone, it'll be sadness again. Happiness is this weird thing that you can have it 1 second, and it'll be gone the next. Kids are a perfect example of this. 1 second, they're giggling, they're laughing, they're on top of the world. The next second, they are literally on the floor, melting into a puddle. Sad. Do you see how fickle happiness is? And it feels like weird that it's like, why are you talking so much about happiness with money? Because the world tries to tell you money will make you happy, and it will kind of. But happiness is fleeting. But yet we've all been guilty of saying things like the following: I just want to be happy. I deserve to be happy, but it can shipwreck our entire life to pursue happy. It is chasing the wind because no matter how hard we try, we can't control our circumstances. So you will never guarantee that you're happy. Because here's the thing: millionaires die sad. Billionaires can be lonely. People with all their bills paid can be extremely unhappy. But when you're broke, it feels like, nah, I'm pretty sure I'd be pretty happy, Craig. So what's the gospel mindset on this? And throw it up there, Bridget. Go to the next one. Sorry. Yeah, the next slide. Next one. You're fine. I put them in the wrong order. The gospel mindset is this: Joy comes from the Lord. Psalm 43, 4 and 5, the scripture that was just on the screen says, "Then I will go to the altar of God, my joy and my delight. I will praise you with my lyre, O God, my God. Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will praise him, my Savior, my God. Then I will go to the altar of my God, my joy, my delight," Paul says. The author of the psalm says, it's not David. He says, "I will go to the house of God, who is the source of my joy, who is the source of my delight." But then in the very next verse, he says, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me?" He just said that the Lord is the source of my joy, but why are you downcast, O my soul? There's this clear idea that while our circumstances might be making us sad, downcast, joy still comes from the Lord. And that even in difficult circumstances, you can still find joy in the Lord. I've stood in some of the worst circumstances that are in no way happy. Whether it's the hospital rooms, I've been in the room while people have died because of this job. I've been there as families have lost loved ones. I've been there as families have lost children. And they are in no way happy, but there can be joy still in the Lord. I've preached at funerals where people cried and wept and were sad, but were joyful because they knew the destination of the person who had been lost. There's this idea that joy comes from the Lord, and it is overriding our circumstances. And this is so crucial, church, because if you don't find your joy in the Lord, you will find yourself chasing the wind to seek you happy. This life is hard. This life is difficult, and there's something that the modern medical industry will try and convince you, and the modern convenience industry will try and convince you. They will say that if you're suffering in any way, something is wrong. That suffering is somehow other than human. So if you're suffering in any way, take a pill, take this, do this, buy this, because suffering in any way is wrong. And yet suffering is the most common of human experience to the beginning of time. But when you chase happy, suffering feels like the ultimate evil has come into your life. That is why the gospel mindset is not be happy, but rather find your joy in the unchanging hand of God. Because if you don't, so this is the foundation, and I can see how you maybe be like, it's a weird way to start talking about money. But it's really important because the world will use money to make happy mindset, and then they will build this second thing upon it. If you don't have money to buy happiness now, use debt. So do you see how the world will say, hey, money will make you happy? And then some of you are like, I believe that. I don't have any. So what do I do now? And they're like, not a problem. MasterCard has a solution for you. You love Kohl's? We love that you use your card. We'll even give you 10% off and then charge you 24% interest so you think you're getting a deal. That's a real thing. Kohl's is a credit card company. Look it up. If you don't have the money to buy happiness now, don't wait. Use debt. The reason our gospel mindset is so important, that joy is found in the Lord, to not chase happiness, is because if you don't, most of American cultures will find themselves making a decision. The lie we believe about money that says, be happy, have more stuff, buy more things, but if I don't have the money that we desperately need to get the stuff, what should we do? And most people will say, well, then I'll just charge it. I'll just kick that can down the road. I'm going to buy it because I have to be happy. Yet if you say, my joy comes from the Lord, I don't need these things. I might want them. We all have wants, but I don't need these things. My joy is found in the Lord. You can avoid these things. But most of us have believed the lie that that thing will make me really happy, though. And then I won't need anything else. I just need this, and then I'll be content. How do I know this? Because the average American home has $8,900 in credit card debt. That's at 20% or above interest. Now, that's not a credit card that you pay off every month, like you use and then you pay off like a debit card. That is in revolving debt. that you carry on going and you're paying 20 to 30% interest on. The average American home, meaning some have more, some have less, $9,000 in credit card debt. And what that tells me, whether you would say you don't believe that or not, whether you'd say, I don't think it's about money making me happy, if you're carrying around $9,000 in credit card debt, what that tells me is at some point you've made decisions to buy something that you couldn't afford because you thought it would do something. Maybe it was about making your kids happy. Maybe it was about taking that vacation. But you didn't stop yourself and say, I can't afford this. I can't have this. I can't use this. You said, hey, if I don't have it, I want to be happy, and MasterCard will happily lend it to me. It's not just credit cards. The average American family has a $650 car payment because who wants to have a reliable used car that isn't flashy? Does anyone drive like an early 2000s Toyota in here? It's like the number one. Anyone got an early 2000s SUV? Yeah. Have you ever felt cool getting into that, Marissa? No? No, yeah. What she just said is true. At least I have a car. That's how I feel every time I get in my car. At least I have a car. I've never been like, I love this car. I love that, it's bells and whistles. I want a new car, but most people, unless you have something new that you probably couldn't afford, but you know what I would think and feel really cool about? Like a 2023 Chevy F-150. Like a new Ram, and you like just get in and the screen is huge and your phone just connects to it, and some of you are like, yeah, that's normal. No, not in my car. It's got a radio, it's nice. If you drive past the parking lot of Crown, there's a lot of really, really nice trucks. It's like a truck dealership over at Crown. And it is like the car payment capital of the world. And you know how I know that is because the average income around our parts, I looked it up this week, is around $40,000 a year. So combined family income may be around 80, some more, some less. Again, these are averages. So you literally can't afford the average car payment. But they all got them. I mean, seriously, just next time you're going to Menards or Walmart, just look at the cars at Crown. We know what they're paying. We know they can't afford them. And the parking lot is full of them. So there's a lot of guys typically, because that's typically, that have made the choice, that truck will make me happy. And I don't care that I can't afford it. I will pay $850 a month to be happy because it makes a cool noise and it looks cool. And my coworkers have one and I don't want to drive a Toyota. So you will trade debt for happiness. It doesn't have to be a truck. It can be whatever. Toys that we all want. But if we want to be happy, what are we supposed to do? Am I telling you not to buy the truck? Craig, I want to be happy. And the only thing that makes me happy is this stuff. It's why you must find your joy in the Lord. Dave Ramsey has a quote that I absolutely love. He says this: we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. I really love that quote. We buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people that we don't like. Most of you aren't the biggest fans of your coworkers, but you're like, I gotta have that truck in the parking lot. So they think that. But you don't have the money, and you don't need the thing. Most of us buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. But that means you would actually have to say no to this world's mindset that has tried to lie to you, that says you will be more happy if you have the stuff. And when you first get it, you will feel happy. You will feel proud. You will take care of that new thing. But over time, it'll become an old thing. Over time, that new truck becomes a 5-year-old truck. And over time, that new credit card purchase becomes that old thing that really isn't that exciting anymore. And over time, your kids loved it at first, but they're not playing with any of their Christmas toys anymore. But you just got your first bill at 24% interest for MasterCard for Christmas. And you really have to wrestle with this, and that is why the gospel mindset is this: the borrower is slave to the lender. The borrower is slave to the lender. Maybe you've heard this proverb before. It's Proverb 22, verse 7. The rich rule over the poor. The borrower is slave to the lender. When you go into debt to a company or a person, you're giving your freedom away to that person. They own you. And you know how they own you? Because they can literally take your stuff without you having say. That's how much they own you. If you don't pay them back what they want, they'll come and they'll take what you own and they'll get their money back. Yet listen to Jesus Christ, or Paul writing about Jesus in Galatians 5:1, one of my favorite verses in the Bible. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves again be burdened by the yoke of slavery. Now, I want to be clear here. Paul is talking about the bounds of law being put on freedom, specifically that of circumcision. But ask yourself, does Jesus Christ desire his followers to be free? I believe this scripture says yes, that he literally died to set us free. And then if the scriptures tell us that debt is slavery, does Jesus care about that? I would argue yes, that he doesn't want to see his followers as slaves to credit card companies or auto loan companies or payday lenders or loan sharks or bookies. Do you think Jesus thinks, oh, I've come to set them free from sin. I've come to set them free to live of righteousness. But if they are in terrible debt or if they are in terrible financial states, I don't care about that. What they do is no big deal. The world says you have to charge it. You've got to live that way. Everyone has a credit card, Pastor Craig. I can't believe you're even arguing we shouldn't have this. Or do you think Jesus says, you believe the lie of the world? I've come to set you free. I've come to tell you that debt brings bondage. I believe that Jesus has set us free to live free from the law, but I believe that he's also set us free to find joy in the Lord so that we don't have to look about these things. Why does Jesus care? Because when you're a slave to someone else, you can't follow Jesus fully. Think about it. Some of you in here have felt Jesus calling you to start a business before. I know that's true because I've talked with you before. You felt Jesus calling you to start a business, but then when you look at the numbers and how much debt you maybe have or how many people you owe, you can't do it. So even though you have this passion, even a passion maybe from the Lord, you can't do it because you got bills to pay. You maybe feel trapped in a job you don't feel called to. You don't have freedom. To move to Salina, my wife and I took an approximately $18,000 pay cut to move here. That doesn't make sense because you're like, well, I got a raise as a senior pastor versus an associate, but my wife worked. We were dual income in Bowling Green. Took an $18,000 pay cut. Most people can't do that, but we didn't carry debt. So we were free to go where Jesus called us to go, to live in a community that we've never been in, because the only debt we had was our home, which was backed by an asset, our mortgage. So we sold the home, we wiped out that debt, and we moved here, and we could adjust our living standard based on our new income because we didn't have the car payments, we didn't have the credit card payments. It gave us freedom to follow Jesus to Salina. Debt will keep you in jobs you don't feel called to. Some of you have to work overtime and see your family less to pay for wants instead of needs. Not to afford food, it's to afford the Disneyland trip or the car payment that you're driving to work the overtime in, to pay for the car that you're going to work in. So you'll see your family less. And there may cause a thing in you, because if I'm hitting the nail on the head for your life, I understand that this can feel like you're being attacked, but it's a place of pleading and love. Because this is the number one listed cause of stress in America, financial stress. If people say, what are your stresses in your life? Financial stress is the number one cause of stress. Do you think it's because people have faithfully followed the gospel's wisdom and Jesus has led them into the most stressful part of their life? Or maybe somewhere along the lines, people have followed the world's wisdom and it's led them into stressful financial waters because they've taken the world's advice rather than the gospel's advice. It's also listed as the number one cause of divorce in America, finances. The world tells you that the only way you can be happy is to have more stuff. And even if you can't afford it, just charge it because there'll always be some company willing to buy you as a slave. And the stats tell us that that is a poison well, that if you keep going to charging and keep going back to debt, that it will eventually burn you out. And the gospel tells us that the borrower is slave to a lender and that Jesus came to bring freedom. And I understand that this is challenging. Again, I don't come from a tone of judgment. This is a place of pleading because I want to see Christians live free. I want to see Christians live in the freedom that Christ bought you. And I don't want you to be a slave to MasterCard. I don't work for them. I want to see you be a slave to Jesus and go where he calls you to go and say what he calls you to say and do what he calls you to do and start that business that's on your heart. Start that ministry that's on your heart. Move across the world and be a missionary because you feel called to it. Or just love your family in a different way. Be generous in a different way because that's what Jesus called you to do. And I don't want you to ever have to think, well, I have an obligation to Visa. Sorry, Jesus. I have an obligation to First Financial because of what's sitting in the driveway. Sorry, Jesus. I want you to live in a different way. And the world will tell you this. This is the last mindset. Well, this is life. You just got to fight to make ends meet. That's what the world will tell you. Like if you talk to people about the financial grind, they'll just tell you, hey, well, that's life, man. You gotta grind. You gotta work the overtime. Your employer definitely wants you to think this. You gotta work the extras. That's just life, baby. None of us can pay our bills. None of us have what we want. All of us are in debt. That is just life. And I just think that is the world's version of life. And they will keep you caught in this vicious cycle because if you haven't noticed it, owners don't like to give up their property. And when they own you, they don't want you to get free. It's why as soon as you start to pay off all your credit cards, more offers will come to you and they'll try and entice you back. Have you noticed that? Like when you start to get financially right, more credit card companies will come after you and say, hey, join us now, because they want you to sell your freedom again to them. And that is why the last gospel mindset is this. It's simple. Live in freedom. Live in freedom. What if I told you that debt, in bondage to debt, and trying to keep up with the Joneses and trying to buy things to make you happy was never God's way? The scriptures tell us that God is the provider of all things and that he will give us all we need to steward and then give back to him. Go back and listen to the message on time. It's pretty much the same principles. Money is the same thing, that God has given us all we need. And it differs so much. The teachings for what he said on money differ so much than what this world has to say. The scriptures teach us that God is our provider, so we must trust him. And they teach us not to chase after happiness somehow, thinking that money will purchase it. The gospel and the scriptures teach us that joy comes from the Lord and not from stuff. So we will learn to be content in our circumstances. We'll prioritize our needs, and we'll try and save for our wants if we need to. We live disciplined lives to say no to things that we can't afford, so we don't live the rat race that everyone else lives. Another Dave Ramsey quote, and I really like him. He says, we live like no one else so that we can live like no one else. Like everyone has credit card debt. So if you avoid these things, you'll live like no one else, but then the end result will be that you'll get to live like no one else. The gospel mindset says that God has called us to freedom in all areas of our life, including financial. And that if we trust in him and look to him for our joy and avoid useless debt, and we steward what God has given us, we will find freedom there. Hear me clearly when I say that there will be plenty of things you want, but the discipline in you will say no to that because your freedom is not worth the next widget. It's not worth the next Amazon purchase. It's not worth a Target run. And freedom financially, when this world is caught in a rat race, is a beautiful thing. Each week, I've had someone come up and share a testimony of what this looks like practically. And this week, I want to share. Because something happened to me just 2 weeks ago that was the exact reason why I'm so passionate about this topic. Because this wasn't always true for Becca and I. It was the week before Christmas, and I want to tell you how financial freedom and living a gospel mindset in this area played out for the Flacks in very practical ways. This is less than a month ago. It's the Tuesday before Christmas, and we're going to get that really cold snap at the end of the week, right? So what happens, of course? Our furnace breaks on Tuesday. We're looking at record cold coming our way, so I call Consolidated Hunters, and I say, hey, I have to have you out there. They come out, they say, hey, your control board is bad on your furnace. It's kind of expensive because supply chain COVID, they all just use that, right? But if you want, we can fix it. And I'm like, well, yeah, I want. We need heat. There's a cold snap coming up. My furnace would not work at all. So that's Tuesday. The cold is coming Friday. Thursday, Becca calls me and says, hey, babe, the washing machine drain is spitting water everywhere and it's backing up. I'm like, awesome. So I call Consolidated Hunter. I'm like, hey, me again. Completely different issue. There's tree roots in my main drain. So I had to have them auger that out. That was Thursday. We go through the cold snap. We have a nice Christmas Eve service. Christmas comes Sunday. About 10 p.m., we have a wonderful Christmas. Our kids are in bed, and I hear this squealing coming from the basement. And I'm like, oh, no, the furnace is going to break again. And I go down there, and my sump pump, the motor is binding. And every time it goes off, it is just squealing and screaming. I'm like, okay. So I come back up, and Becca's like, what are you going to do? I'm like, nothing. It's 10 p.m. on Christmas. But I guess I know what I'm going to do tomorrow. So at about 8 o'clock the next day, I go down, and luckily it had worked through the night, but the motor's clearly going bad, but there's water all over the floor. And I'm like, oh no, but it didn't come from the sump pump. And I look up, and overnight, the kitchen drain right above the sump pump had completely given way and was leaking. It was a copper pipe, and it was leaking all over the floor from the drain. The furnace is here. The main drain they had to clean out is here. The sump pump is here. And the kitchen sink thing is here. And in less than 1 week, I went back and I looked at the bills. We spent $1,293 and 4 items the week of Christmas on nothing we wanted. I've never once thought, ooh, a new sump pump would be really fancy. That would be great. And it was so close to Christmas, we couldn't even be like, sorry, kids, you get heat this Christmas. $1,293, and guess what? By God's grace, we just paid for it. Not by credit cards. We don't have that much money left over in our check. We don't have that much fat, but we have this thing called a savings account, and I implore you to get one. Because by God's grace, we just took that money from our savings, and we paid all those bills. We don't have the newest cars in our house. Our kitchen is from 1965. If you come over, it's not very nice. We don't have a dishwasher. It's an older home. But when our furnace breaks, I had zero stress about how we would pay for it. I'd rather not have granite countertops that I can't afford so that when my furnace breaks, I just call them. And I was annoyed for sure. But I was just annoyed, not stressed about how I would pay for it. This is how real life works. And by God's grace, this isn't anything that we've done. We've just tried to follow God's plan. And he says, hey, set aside for a rainy day. And so we've done that in his grace. And now by his grace, we'll take the little bit of fat that we have from our savings and we'll pay ourselves back over the next several months to pay back what we had to use. That is 1 month ago, the most practical example. And if you are in my shoes and you have that happen and you can't do that, this is the message for you. Now you'll notice today I talked nothing about giving. Not one thing. And I was convicted this week to not say anything about, like, this isn't a message on giving. When the church talks, it talks so often about why you need to give to the church. And here's the thing. If you're broke, you ain't going to do any of that. And if you're a slave to MasterCard, you're not going to do that. I think most of you, if I asked you, do you want to live a generous life? Say, yeah, I think that'd be awesome. And then if I followed up and say, can you live a generous life? Say, well, the car payment's due on the 20th, the mortgage is due on the 22nd, the this, the that, the this. So it felt like if I get up here and I talk to you about why you should live a generous life, because that's what God calls us to, there's a gospel mindset on generosity. If you're caught in this bondage of debt and trying to buy things to make you happy, you ain't going to get to generosity. So what's the point? I would rather you find freedom in Jesus today, in all areas of your life, including your finances, and then when you do that, you will be able to walk towards generosity. And you'll be so grateful to the Lord that you don't have to live in this rat race. By his grace and his wisdom, that you'll find yourself living generously. That's my challenge for you. If the advice you're living is backed by MasterCard, Visa, and Kohl's, reject it. And walk towards the advice that Jesus has given us clearly. Let's pray as the worship team comes forward.